I remember being asked a question once. Why are African countries so inherently weak? I paused, not to weigh up a great response, but because really I had no idea what the question meant. Weak compared to what?
Now, I think it's pretty much accepted that humans are quite good at critical thinking. We are often capable of expanding on ideas past simple black and white descriptions. That being said, occasionally we fall into the trap of judgment over consideration. What might start up as small throwaway comments ends up being more impactful than we would have first imagined. And that brings me on to a larger point of judgment, the African continent. Now, the question of whether Africa is weak only really makes sense if we understand what weak means. And that's where I see the judgment every time the question is posed. Weak compared to what, I ask? Well, in Europe, began the person opposite me, and immediately something interesting has been revealed. His remark underlines a persistent habit of ours. We tend to judge based on stereotypes and not actions, expectations and not reality. There's a brilliant book by Jeffrey Herbst titled States and Power in Africa, in which he explores the creation of African states. In comparing Europe and Africa, we see a stark divide. While this explanation is oversimplified, the general idea is that Europe developed through the establishment of institutions, departments, and crucially, borders. In the book, a commenter noted, "Tell a man to go build a state, and he will try and establish a definite and defensible territorial boundary." This very line underlines the basis of our misunderstanding. You see, in Africa, states developed quite differently for a number of reasons. Unlike Europe, pre-colonial Africa was sparsely populated and had long stretches of empty, undulating land. That geographic reality made setting up walls or trying to control places on the periphery virtually impossible due to the incredible effort of reaching these places on the perimeter. That meant that most of the control in Africa came from the center, through the mechanism of influence, so influence from churches, community groups, and leaders, which lent itself to more effective control than randomly setting up walls and demarcating. So, and this is the important point, if we try and measure Africa using a European model of development, calling it weak is no longer a matter of objectivity, but a reflection of a standard we've applied to two vastly contrasting cultures. So the common mistake made by those questioning the strength of Africa is almost unconscious. Instinctively, they've used the extensive understanding of European developments and have tried to apply the same logic to Africa, where naturally the concept occasionally breaks down. Maybe the problem isn't Africa, but the framework we measure it by. That's not to say one system is better than the other. That only means that we will always struggle to see Africa as capable, because we assume it's developed in all the wrong ways. To better envisage this, there is a lovely African proverb, "It takes a village to raise a child." It's a wonderful phrase, but it means something quite different everywhere. So in the Western world, the idea mainly centered around replacing the village with departments, with quality education, welfare systems, so that all these factions can work together to help raise the next generation. In Africa, it was never about replacing the village, but who and how people act within one. In the West, systems are the village. In Africa, people are the village. And that's vital, because pre-colonial Africa developed mostly through influence and relationships. So when people rush to compare Europe and Africa with the assumption that one is irreconcilably weaker, they often overlook the fact that they are inherently different. They developed differently, they are culturally different, and their future trajectory is different. That's not to romanticize Africa, for it has profound challenges majority of the world can say they have overcome. But to diminish one as weaker is to make the same mistake of acknowledging a stereotype, however accurate, and not the action. So I think my answer to the person's question would be, not all African states are weak. They're just different to how European states historically functioned. And yes, that difference means some are incredibly volatile and problematic, but the more stable ones might make the same argument about weaker European states. Basically, comparisons are kind of ineffective. We are all, for example, not comfortable acknowledging no two children are raised exactly the same. why then can we not acknowledge that no two continents develop in the exact same way? So let's not judge Africa on what it should have looked like, but on what it does now, given its own history of development. So perhaps the truth behind closed doors isn't that Africa is weak, but that we've been looking at it through the wrong lens. Thankfully, these lessons aren't solely political, but ring clear in our everyday lives as well. So, when you next decide to maybe paint a picture, don't judge your painting based on the preconceived image you had in your head. Just because it starts differently doesn't mean it too can't become a masterpiece. So, regardless of how we are formed, we all have the capacity to become the very best versions of ourselves. Thank you very much indeed.